Welcome to the Adoption Journey podcast. I am your host, Tarsha Smith. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I wanted to take the time to create a space where we can talk about all things adoption. And while adoption is a beautiful thing, it is often misunderstood and a largely overlooked topic because adoption is here. It's not going anywhere. And I just want people to understand because more people than you realize have been have been affected by adoption, whether they're the adoptee, whether they are a birth parent, whether they are an adopted parent, or people that work within that profession. There are tons of people that are affected by this topic. So that's the purpose of this podcast. I wanted to, like I said, create a space and talk about it, especially amongst people that look like me, because there is a stigma sometimes when it comes to adoption within the African American community. So I wanted to also take the time to, just give you another perspective, give you another way to think about it, or maybe give you something to think about, something that you possibly had not thought about. And in doing so, because when I announced the podcast, I found out that there were a lot of people that didn't realize I was adopted. It's never been a secret. Maybe I've just not been in a space where it would come up. And so I've been getting those, oh my gosh, I didn't know you're adopted. Yes, I am. Very proud adoptee. And I wanted to tell my story. I've never spoken about my full story on such an open platform. And so I wanted to talk about how I found out I was adopted, what my childhood was like, and what my search looked like when I began to search for my biological family, what that whole process entailed. And so something that always stood in the back of my mind, I met an adopted parent. And I remember them saying to me, because I knew they had adopted, so I shared that I was adopted. And their insight was, if I give this child this phenomenal life, why should they even care about where they come from or their biological family? And I thought, wow, you're digging yourself a nice little hole because it has nothing to do with how a person is raised or treated that makes you want to go out and say, where am I from? It's just a natural curiosity that exists. At least that's my experience. It was just a natural curiosity. So I wanted to kick off episode 1, part 1 of my adoption story. And to that point, I want to paint a picture for you, okay? So I was born in Chicago in 1975, and I was placed up for adoption. And I was adopted at about 5 weeks old. Now, I didn't know this till a little bit later on, but so my parents have had me since I was a little tiny little thing. I've never known anything different. In December of 75, we moved to Florida, where I have resided ever since. At the time we moved to Tampa. I grew up with, at the time, for a long time, I was the only child. So I was my parents' only baby to spoil. I grew up in a nice house, literally picket fences. There was 2 little red picket fences on either side of our house. And we were the only Blacks on the block. And I grew up going to, during elementary school, mostly private schools, because in their words, they wanted to give me the best education and make sure I had the best start in life. And I had toys, I had games, I had all the things. You name it, I had it. Again, I admit I was spoiled, parents' only baby at the time, and for a very long time, because my sister didn't come along until I was 9. And so that is how I grew up. But even growing up in this happy childhood in this environment, I noticed very early on, I didn't look like anybody. And my mother is very fair skinned. And at that time, this is now this we're in the 80s. So, everybody was wearing the perms, and my mom has very long hair. And that side of the family resembled just that. You have from very light skin all the way, there's a spectrum, but I always considered myself to be the darker end of the spectrum. My hair didn't look like anybody. My features didn't look like anybody. On my dad's side of the family, my father is closer to my complexion. I still don't look like him, but just complexion wise, we have that in common, as well as his side of the family. They're closer to my complexion, closer to what my hair looks like. I still don't look like anybody. I've always been very observant. And so what I would begin to focus on was the shape of my eyes, my nose, my lips. I didn't look like anybody. But that being said, that did not take away from my experience of growing up in a loving household, 2-parent household. And then let's talk about the extended family. At the time when we moved to Florida, it was my grandparents, my parents, myself, my auntie, and her 3 girls. And my cousins, the 4 of us, because there's 3 of them, 1 of me, we grew up like sister cousins. We did everything together because they kept us together. To this day, we're still a very close-knit family. We fought. We got in trouble together. We got spankings together. All those things that cousins do, we did all those things together. And that was my environment. They lived in Orlando. I lived in Tampa. So either they were at our house for the weekend or vice versa. I was at their house for the weekend. Like, that's how I grew up. This is what I knew. Nobody ever made me feel out of place, nor did I ever feel out of place. No one ever made me feel some type of way. This is my family. And still to this day, this is my family. And I'm just driving home the point that I was a happy kid, happy child. Like, this was my life. But the one thing that stood out, is small of a thing that is, but I would always notice, especially when we would get around the entire family, because I grew up going to family reunions. And so then that extended family from Arkansas, and Gary and Deanna on my mom's side, and on my dad's side, Chicago, because I would go back and forth to Chicago quite a bit because I still, my people, my dad's side of the family was there. So, spending time with extended family, always knew I didn't look like anybody, even though, like I said, my childhood was amazing. So not only that, skin color became a little bit of an issue for me because I was around my mom's side of the family a whole lot more because they were here in Florida. But I'm getting punched 2 ways because then I'm going to school, and a lot of times I'm the only little Black girl in class because I grew up in a predominantly white and Hispanic area. So I'm the only little Black girl in class, or a handful of Black kids in the entire school. And so then I'm getting hit with this identity thing. And I'm still in elementary. I'm a little kid. But there's things that little people, they notice. And we internalize it. And I wasn't wise enough to speak out about it. But I'm noticing. And I'm dealing. And, as a kid, you try and fit in over here. And then I get around my cousins. And then I got to flip the switch because then I'm trying to fit in. Because when I would come to Orlando and when I would go to church on Sundays, That was my Black experience. When I would go to school, that was my white experience. But I am grateful for those experiences because, as any of you know, like, I can balance. I can go either way. And it's because of that type of experience and how I grew up. But again, still driving home the point that I was a happy kid. So let's jump into the classroom, okay? One random week, and I got my spelling words. One of the words on that list was adoption. And so, you remember how you had to learn how to spell the word, and then you had to learn the definition for the test on Friday. And in learning about adoption, somewhere in my little brain, I decided, well, maybe that's why I don't look like anybody. But the biggest word that stood out for me was the word, because it said, like, you would choose, or you can, someone chooses a person or a thing, but that word choose, it always stood out to me in that definition. So again, I'm a talkative kid. I'm an inquisitive kid. I'm an observant kid. And let me just tell you a little bit about my mother. She is all that, very put together and just very prim and proper, always has been. And then she's got this little girl that talks all the time and asks all the questions all the time. And so we're in one of those moments. So I learned about what adoption meant in school. And I'd already been dealing with, I don't look like anybody. Why doesn't my hair do that when it gets wet? Because my mom has those big ringlets. My hair didn't do that. And so just dealing with this identity thing. And one day, and I'll never forget it, we were at home, standing in the dining room, almost just in passing. Like, I'm going this way, she's going that way. And I stopped and I said, am I adopted? My mother looked at me like she had seen a ghost, like I had 10 heads. As an adult now, and in hindsight, I know I threw her so off that in that moment. But I'm a kid, I don't know any better. And she gathered herself and she said yes. And then she proceeded to ask me why would I ask such a, why would you ask me that? And I just said, because I don't look like anybody. And then I went on about my way. Now as an adult, I have my own kids. I'm married. I can only imagine my mother must have went to my dad and was like, oh my God, this little girl just out of the blue asked. Now, I don't know what their plans were for telling me, but I am 100% sure that was not it. I don't know when they had planned to tell me, but in that moment, that was not it. But that's how it happened. It was just for me being inquisitive, me learning about a word, and me saying, you know what, maybe that's why I don't look like anybody. But at least I had that question answered. So I went on about, my little life, whatever. Again, I am a kid in elementary school. And so I began to ask questions here and there because now I'm trying to understand, okay, was I born in Chicago? Yes, I was born in Chicago. That's when I learned that they had adopted me when I was like 5 weeks old. I also learned that it went through an agency, but as a kid, I didn't know what that meant. Okay. And they also told me, because I began to ask questions, okay, if you didn't have me and this other person had me, then where are they? And at the time, because I'm so, elementary, my mom told me that it was a closed adoption. But she had to explain to me what that meant because, I don't know, I'm a kid. So she just told me any information about them, it's closed, it's sealed. And the only way to crack open the case was with a lawyer. So that always stuck with me. Oh, if I ever wanted to know anything, I'm going to have to get a lawyer. Okay. So as a little bit of time moves on, and I still poke here and there, I'm still in elementary school. I'm still poking. I finally was able to draw out of my parents that my birth mother was only 15 when she had me. Again, they confirmed, yes, you were born in Chicago, Illinois. They also told me that I was born at Cook County Hospital because, now I have the name of the hospital. I know where I was born, the city and state, and that my birth mother was 15 years old. That's the only piece of information that I had for the next few years, because all of this happened in elementary school. And as time goes on, that curiosity grew. As we begin to grow up, we turn the corner into middle school, and I'm still around my cousins, still doing, the same thing, still just living my life. But that curiosity, it's there. And I begin to even notice just how I was and how I moved and what I mean by moved, just how things that I did, it was a little different from how my cousins did things, and not in a bad way. It was just, I saw the difference and I noticed the difference. But I also, let me reiterate this. I was never ever made to feel like a black sheep. I was never ever made to feel, like I didn't belong. This is all I knew. This is all I know. And just here recently, when I was speaking to one of my cousins about this, I was like, I know I don't have to tell you thank you, but thank you. Because y'all never made me feel nothing but, girl, we your people. We're gonna play with you. We're gonna fight with you. We're gonna get in trouble with you. We're gonna do all the things because that's what family does. And that's what we did. And it didn't take away that curiosity, especially when I knew I was adopted and I knew there's somebody out there that I'm connected to that I probably even look like. Where are they? What's the story? Like, what happened? And I never felt any type of way. I have talked to other adoptees that were angry. They felt like someone just gave them away. They have abandonment issues. I've encountered that. I've talked to people, and I thank God that's not my story. I didn't feel like that. I felt chosen. I felt lucky. And especially when, even though it was for a very, very small amount of time, I spent a little bit of time in the foster care system because at that time, you could not go to the hospital and just get your baby. They were notified when I was born, but you had to wait. There was a waiting period. And then later in life, my mother shared this story with me. She said that they were notified when I was born. And the social worker, they met with the social worker, and the social worker came with 2 pictures of 2 baby girls. One was me, of course, and another was this, my mom described it as this little light-skinned baby. And she put both the pictures down. And my mom and my dad told her, like, we can't take 2 babies. But my mom said that when she saw my picture, she was like, that's where my heart is. That's my baby. And so she chose me. Literally chose me, because it could have went either way. And so, and I'm just learning that part of my story here very recently. So, and then when they told the social worker which baby they wanted, then there was a waiting period. in the words of my mother, there was all kinds of red tape back then. And then so they got over that hurdle and they were able to bring me home at about 5 weeks. So that is part one of my story. Please stay tuned for episode 2 for as the questions get, I ask more questions. And the very first time I began to search and look for my family. Again, if you're joining this podcast, I thank you so much for doing so. And it's a safe place. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to email me. You can follow us on YouTube at the Adoption Journey Podcast. Also follow us on Instagram at the Adoption Journey Podcast. Ask all the questions. I want the conversations. I would love to hear your stories. And again, stay tuned for episode 2, where I get a little bit deeper into my adoption journey. Take care, y'all. Thanks for joining me.